Hi, this is super cool history class and Miss Morgan going over the key information of Chapter 7, Section 2. You should pause the video at any time if you need to catch up with what's being said, and here we go. The first thing you want to do is just ignore some of these directions here. Oh, nothing, that didn't work the way I wanted it. Oh, there we go. Oh, this doesn't look good. Ignore these directions that I'm scribbling over. Okay, you had to do the definitions, just there was different directions. Okay, the first question I'm going to go over is very, very important. When you have a test, it's going to be on it. I'm going to ask the question in almost the exact same way, if not the exact same way. So you need to make sure your information is accurate. First, why did feudalism even come to exist in the first place? It had to do with these factors. First, there were invasions by specific groups that are listed there. They were part of Chapter 7, Section 1 outline. Second, the kings and emperors were too weak to keep order. So the invasions really wouldn't have mattered if the kings and emperors could do something about them, but they couldn't because they were too weak. So what evolved was a system of protection, which was feudalism, because people needed protection for themselves, their homes, and their land. So be sure all of your information in this section is correct. And if your order of information is different, it's not a big deal. You just need to know the three parts of why feudalism evolved. All right, so the next part deals with obligations. What did people owe each other as part of feudalism? So, lords and vassals. You have that fill in, so check it out. And then, as part of the feudal contract with a vassal, what did the lord have to do? So, first off, gave the vassal a fief. And this could be various sizes. It could be a few acres large to hundreds of square miles. It just depends on what the size of the fief. A vassal also got everything that was on the land, and a bunch of items are listed there. Next up, you have protection. So the lord was supposed to protect the vassal, and that was part of the deal with the feudal contract. Next up, what does the vassal provide a lord? Because he's not getting this stuff for free. He owes something back to the lord for what the lord is giving him, as what's mentioned in 2b. So for this section, you should have something about the military service, money payments, and advice. So that's what the vassal was giving the lord. When you're all set with this, go to the next page. Okay, on page 2. At the top, the question asks, why were these feudal relationships complicated? And it has to do with different layers of the lord social class. So lords could have vassals, and then vassals might have vassals. And Mr. Zoller's manorialism video explains how a lord could be a lord and a vassal. So, and I have that underlined here. The other thing is that if a vassal pledged loyalty to several lords and then they got in a little squabble, it was complicated. But a vassal usually had what was called a liege lord, and that's over here. Highlight it. A liege lord. And that's who he gave his first loyalty to. Okay? So that was, you kind of had your number one lord that you owed loyalty to first. Moving on to knights. So knights started their training really early, and if on your paper you wrote that at 7 years they went to a lord's castle to train to be a knight, then you have a good fact, and that's important to know. So this training started early. My son is 7, he's in 2nd grade, but it's not like the education back then was the same as today. It's not like these kids dropped out of 2nd grade to go train to be a knight. It was just, life was different. You would train to be something early on as opposed to being in school till you were 18 like we do in 2014. So monks also, boys who were training to be a monk also started at an early age of 7. All right, so they learned to do certain things that are listed there, and they had really strict training, as the third bullet explains. And they were punished for laziness, and that is something that they had to deal with if they were lazy. So, what was life like as a knight? I gave you that information, and so that's what it was like, fighting and um, defending land was important. Castles and defense, I gave you that fact, how they were built, how they were used for defense, right? Gave you that fact. And then you need to check number 9, your information for number 9. Where were the castles located that were vulnerable to being seized? So in general, it was good geographic locations, as I have listed on the screen. And some of those might be river crossings, near river crossings, harbors, and mountain passes. So I'll explain in class what a mountain pass is, but these are the specific locations you should have listed in number 9, and you should double check that your number 9 is accurate, because I did notice when I was flipping through these that not everyone had an accurate answer to number 9. So moving on to noble women, and remember, pause the video at any point if you need to fill something in, and I'm going too fast. So noble women, what were they doing? I just want to point out that a lot of times people confuse the role of noble women and the training of girl nobles, so they are different, and I've written that to the side. So one thing that was important is that women had some important roles if their husband went fighting, and a woman would take over specific duties that are listed there. And so you should have this fact and some examples of what duties a woman might take over if her husband had to leave the manor and fight. So pause the video if you need to add something. You may also want to check what you have at the top of page 3, because this topic moves on to page 3. When you're all set with page 2, move on to page 3. So before you move on, or if you've moved on already, that's fine. This is a little diagram of feudal society, and I like it because it shows how the lord social class has different levels to it. So you have lords and lesser lords, and the lesser lords are vassals. They're the same thing. And so the lord social class has more than one level to it, and this diagram does a good job of showing that. So there's some more facts about the role of women. So the training of daughters involved going to a friends or relatives for training, just like their brothers. And there's certain jobs they need to know before they got married, and there were some that learned how to read or write. Not all, but some. So we're moving on to chivalry. So here are some bullet points for chivalry. And if you think of, well, if you're an athlete, the MIAA has like a sportsmanship code, and you have to follow that. So this is the same type of thing. It's just a little different because you're talking about knights and you're talking about fighting, but it's still the same general idea that there's certain rules that you have to follow so that you fight fairly. So just make sure you have good information for this section. And pause the video if you need to fill something in. So the manor system. This we're going to move into the role of peasants and the lords. So the first thing is this section here will tell you, what do the lords and peasants do for each other? Mutual obligations. That means both sides owe something to the other. So for the peasants, you should have something about the work that they did, and that would be farming and certain repairs. Also, they had to pay lords fees at certain times, and this would be in goods, not money. At this point in Europe, they're not using money. So you should have some examples of that. So also, what did the lords give them in return for all this work? It was they got some of their own land to farm and protection from the lord. And they're basically guaranteed food, housing, and land. It wasn't great food or housing or land, but they got something. So when you're happy with your information on page 3, move on to the last page, page 4. So at the top, the heading mentions a self-sufficient world. And if you've watched Mr. Zoller's video, which you may or may not have already watched, but he talks a lot about self-sufficiency. And I wrote on the paper, as you see, what did it mean to have a self-sufficient world? So you should write that in on your paper, what I wrote at the top. So make sure if you skip number 15, you write in some of the items produced by peasants. They didn't have schooling. They didn't know about the larger world because there was no need to. It's not like they had relatives, that lived in France that they would go visit. Like you might go visit your relatives in a different state or a different somewhere else. They didn't do that. Their world was the manor, and that's the only world that they knew, and that was all they needed to know, and for the most part. And some of them might go away from the manor or the village, but most of them just stayed put, and their life was the manor. I included a picture of the manor. So, oops. Let's try to get that. So that's over to the right, and it just shows you the different parts of a manor, and I'm pretty sure it's not drawn to scale, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, so now we're moving into some specifics about peasants. Number 17 should be list facts about how life was difficult, and not just like what peasants did, but how it was difficult. And the kids helping in the fields, I mean, that's all they knew, and that was life back then. So I'm not sure I would put that in this section if I was doing this answer key, today. I did it many years ago, but in general, they work a lot. They might be lacking some food because if the harvest disappeared before the crops weren't ready, they had a short life expectancy, 35 years. So I would have died probably 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, and that was typical to not live past 35 years. Didn't have a lot of meat. I guess if you're a vegetarian, you don't care about that, but I like meat. And then personally, I'm not a big animal fan. I mean, they're okay, but if I had to live in my house with animals, I might not really enjoy it. But like I said, if you're a peasant, that might be all you ever knew, and you wouldn't know any different. So that was your world, but I don't know. That would be difficult. I mean, imagine they kind of smell and might be going to the bathroom in the hut. Anyway, what do they do to relax and have fun? A lot of what still happens today, no matter what social class you're in. So I listed the topics there. I mean, people, if you've never been to a wedding, that can be really fun. People have a lot of visitors when they have a baby born, or, that's exciting. We have holidays we have school off and work off. A lot of people do around the holidays that are listed there. And many of us might not butcher an animal for a feast, but some people might. Some people, like Mr. Shoemaker, might. And then there's other things that are listed. So that's it for today in Chapter 7, Section 2. And I hope you got all the information that you needed. And I'm signing off. Goodbye.